Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you so much, Pete, Nicholas, and Mark as well, for inviting me along tonight. It's great to be here. It's a great turnout, too. Thanks for coming out on what I know is a busy week for you guys. But just to end that last question, we actually live just up the road up in Islington, and we moved here about a year ago to be close to our family. And a lot of time, even though I'm just basically doss around drawing a huge pension that you're paying for, sadly. One of the things I love doing is doing this kind of thing, which is taking some of the stuff that arose out of my professional life and academic life and thinking it through a bit more in relation to faith, and then trying to break that down to make it accessible and ordinary and practical. So that's roughly where I am right now. And we're going to be talking about ego trip. I did write a book called Ego Trip, or The Big Ego Trip, in fact, which all my friends immediately thought must be a biography. And I told them, no, it wasn't. But anyway, Ed Koch, the mayor of New York, colourful guy back a few decades ago, would famously greet people with the question, "Hey, how am I doing?" Which was a kind of a twist on that Joey Friends, that very New York, "Hey, how are you doing?" But "Hey, how am I doing?" And it was an interesting, it was one of his hallmarks, his trademarks actually. And in doing that, he gives us a little window into what politicians who need to get re-elected worry about. How am I doing? What do you think of me? And a few of us here are going to run for office, I guess, although I know probably one or two will. But the research literature on self-worth suggests that unconsciously we're all of us, asking that question every day in almost every human encounter. How am I doing? What do you think of me? And of course, we didn't really need psychologists to tell us that. In fact, we often don't need psychologists actually to tell us a lot of the things they tell us. We kind of knew it. But way back in 1798, the father of modern economics, Adam Smith, Scotsman, he said this. He said, he didn't say that. He didn't say that. And Johnny, sadly, you put these into my slideshow, and yes, we got there. Okay, I was about to blame Jono there, but he said, "To what purpose is all the toil and bustle of this world? What is the end of greed and ambition, of the pursuit of wealth and power and preeminence? Is it to supply food and drink and clothes? No, the wages of the poorest labourer can supply those things. What then are the advantages of that great purpose of human life, which we call bettering our condition?" That's the question. Here's his answer: to be observed, to be attended to be noticed. It's an interesting observation from an economist. And the struggle for recognition, to be noticed, to be seen, to be approved of, is really one of the core motivating factors in the human psyche. And I wonder whether you see yourself in that. I think most of us do, if we're really honest, struggling for recognition. But I guess there are one or two here, at least, who are thinking, no, actually, I don't recognize myself in that. I'm the captain of my own ship, thank you very much. I steer by my own compass, and I really don't care what people think. And there are a few people like that. Some of them are psychopaths, which I'm sure isn't you. Most of them are a different kind of person, but it turns out that I think we're more troubled by that question, what do you think of me, than we'd like to think. In fact, there was a guy called Mark Leary, and a psychologist. He collected a group of people just like you. If you're one of these, I don't care what people think about me. if you're one of those, he collected a group of people just like you and he put them to a test, a psychological experiment. And here's what happened. Everybody had to sit alone in a room and talk into a microphone that had been placed in front of them for about 5 minutes. And they'd been told that in the room next door, there was another person listening, couldn't see them, but listening to what they had to say. And that person was selecting from a number of possible candidates the person that they wanted to be with them in the next stage of this really interesting experiment. Never met this person, but this was a particularly interesting way of selecting out a partner for the next stage. And they couldn't tell you why we were doing it this way. Just trust us and follow the rules. Okay? So these people who'd been selected because they protested that they feel they are independent of what other people think. They really don't care what other people think, you see. That was the subjects. So what happened when they start talking about themselves? Well, they were shown a screen with a score on it. And the score started at 5. And if the score went up and you got toward 10, the closer you got to 10, the more that person wanted to spend the time with you in the next part of the experiment. If it goes down below 5 towards 0, the less they wanted to spend time with you. But hey, you don't care what people think, so off we go. So you say, I'm David, I'm brought up in the kind of north of England, but I actually went to university in Scotland, and things went a bit. I guess if I'm honest, things went a bit pear-shaped in my finals, and I didn't get a great degree. But I guess you'd describe me as a bit of an extrovert, and although, funnily enough, I've been thinking. Sorry, you describe me as a bit of an extrovert, but I've been thinking quite a bit about the Christian faith recently. In fact, I went to an evangelistic event last night, and that's the score I should have got there. Yes. Oh dear, it's not working. But the number was bogus feedback. Of course, it was all never take part in a psychological experiment, especially if you're undergraduate, because it's never what they tell you is going on. It's always something else. And after the experiment, when they measured people's what's called state self-worth or self-esteem, the results showed that whether you belong to the I'm captain of my own ship group or not, when you experience rejection, your self-esteem falls. And when they don't esteem us, it's much harder to continue esteeming ourselves. And so we work for the likes and the ticks and the approval and the gongs and all the other indicators of esteem, and we on the treadmill. But I guess here's the question. Does it matter that we're like this? Or indeed, why are we like this? And actually that's quite a big subject, and we could talk about evolutionary psychology, I guess. But at a much more basic level, a basic sense of self-worth is important to us as human beings because it's what gives us confidence to feel that we can go out and make something of the world. If you've got a sense of self-worth, then that is the platform from which you feel you can go out and make a difference and reach out to other people. It's a basic sense of self-worth that gives you the sense that you're able to offer love to someone, or actually to even receive love. It seems that this basic sense that I'm significant, I'm worth thee, I'm worth something is quite integral to all those very basic, fundamental human activities. So here's the question I want us to think about tonight. If self-worth is so important, on what or on whom should it be based? What should we build it around? That's the question. Okay? And I think we tend to come up with two answers to that. The first we've already touched on. We can base it around the esteem other people offer us. You base your self-worth on other people's recognition and other people's approval. And of course, the most common way to get recognition is today's world especially, is achievement. We burn the midnight oil. We go the extra mile. We weave into the conversation. You've never noticed yourself doing that, have you? Just slipping in a little fact about yourself that's actually quite extraneous to the meaning of what's going on, but you somehow still slipped it in. All of us have found ourselves almost compulsively doing that. And it starts in primary school, doesn't it, with bringing home the class teddy bear for the week. I got it. Or the for being the best kid, or getting a star for me, or right through to the prestige of you went to Oxbridge, or the big annual bonus. Bonus is a lot about money, but it's also about me, about ego, about recognition. A New Year's honours list. If you knew how even some clergy hunger for titles. People in the church even hunger for titles, recognition. And when things are going well, approval, being noticed, as Adam Smith put it, is intoxicating. That's what makes standing up here doing this kind of job, like I'm doing tonight, so seductive, so alluring, so dangerous. It's intoxicating. The problem, though, of course, as you don't have to work at this too long to figure out, is that that's great while you're getting it, but what when you're not getting it? It's great while it's going well, but what happens when it's going badly? It's great while you're still professor of psychiatry, head of department at University of Bristol, but what happens when you're retired? And the speed at which you are forgotten, believe me, is extraordinary. And if you haven't already experienced the speed at which life moves on after you left a job, you've not lived, you've not worked in a company, because very quickly, people regroup and move forward with their goals and objectives. And you were yesterday. And the problem is, what happens when we stop achieving? You get old, or you get ill. Or you've always struggled with this issue of self-worth, and even though you do achieve, somehow you can't translate that into a sense of worth. But mostly, what happens when we stop achieving? And this is a bit of an old illustration now, but I like it, so I do keep using it. Johnny Wilkinson, who, if I can get to come up. They were back in 2003, I think it was. He scored. This is years ago now, isn't it? 15 years ago. He scored the dropped goal that won it for England against Australia, and it was a great moment in rugby history. And I hate rugby, actually. Just come clean on that. So, but I am really interested in people. And he after that goal, I think it was about 28 seconds before the end of the match, he won it. And look at his composure and his concentration and the way the thing went perfectly over. And the hats thrown in the air, and he was lauded and paraded through the streets. He became a kind of a national treasure overnight. Everything that little boy who first walked out onto the rugby field when he was 8, everything he dreamed of, come true. And yet in his book, Tackling Life, he writes this. He says, within hours of that kick, I was tumbling out of control. You see, I'm only as good as my last kick. I'm afflicted with a powerful fear of failure, and I didn't know how to free myself from it. You see, within hours, not days, months, but within hours, because you're only as good as your last kick. In a world that's moving on quickly, you're only as good as the last kick. And that's the problem with staking your sense of worth as a person on those external achievements. It's a fast-moving world which you're only as good as yesterday. Or take another example. I remember a woman telling me, she said, I can't figure out why people would ever want to do the high jump. Athletes who do the high jump. Because she said, what do they do when you get over the thing, but the bar? She said they always move it higher. They always move it higher. She said, like my father did. Always higher. Always higher. Never enough for him. And no matter how high I jumped, or hard I jumped, or how often I jump, and if I'm honest, he's dead now, and I'm still jumping. It's never enough. That's the problem with other people's esteem. How much is enough? You got an MBE. Who wants an MBE? For goodness sake, an OBE. Crumbs. A knighthood. OBE. You want a knighthood. We hunger after these things that somehow validate us. And the reason I'm not doing this just in the form of a lecture is because this is a deeply emotional thing for many of us. It goes really deep. How much is enough? When will I ever be enough? So there's the problem with staking our sense of self-worth on those contingencies. And when we do that, the problem is that our self-worth then always hangs on a thread, doesn't it? Constantly vulnerable, always at risk. It's the boom or bust ego. The boom or bust ego. We feel great when we succeed and we're nothing when we fail, and on it goes. So if that's not a good idea, and I think you'll work out roughly my argument was leading us to that conclusion there, roughly not a good idea, then what is it? What if it's not the first thing, other people's esteem, what is it? What's the second thing? Well, the second thing is your own esteem. You say what your worth is. Now, this seems to be a stroke of genius and cue the rise of the self-esteem movement in the middle part of last century, actually. Here, psychologists and therapists really seem to make a smart move, because they said there's only one reliable way to avoid having to rely on other people's approval. You say what you're worth. They can't take that away from you. It only depends on the strength of your own will to assert who you are and how much you're worth. And of course, the residue of that movement is everywhere around us. Its legacy is everywhere around us. The attempt to boost ourselves. I'm special. I'm worthy. I intoxicate people just by being there. I just need to keep repeating this. In fact, here's something I got in Warsons just about 6 months ago. I snapped. I totally got this, a journal to remind myself that I'm truly awesome and capable, and that I'm seriously going to nail it no matter what it is, and no matter how much I secretly doubt myself, because doubt is just a 4-letter word. Okay, 5, and I should doubt the doubt like the nonsense it is, and chant I can, and on it goes. And it's a kind of a send up, but also it's making a point that for a big part of the last half century, this has been seen as a solution to self-worth, is you say what you're worth. And it sounds good, doesn't it? No one can take that away from you. No one can take your own assessment away from you. The only problem is, there's no evidence that it works. I mean, come and talk to me later if you want me to point you to some of the the evidence, but the evidence has stacked up in recent years that we find it really hard to stake our sense of worth on our own declaration, on our own assertion. Here's one study, I'll just chip in quickly. It's by Joanna Wood at the University of Ontario, of Hamilton, Ontario, in Canada. And she took, here's the reference at the bottom there, she took a sample of undergraduates, and she did a randomized experiment. She randomly allocated her sample to 3 groups. At baseline, she carried out a raft of psychometric tests, one of which was to measure self-worth, self-esteem, one's personal self-rating of one's worth. Okay? And she divided them into 3 groups. And the first group were given a pack of boosting statements. I'm special. I attract people. I'm magnetic. I am powerful. These kind of things. She preceded this with a study showing that about 50% of North Americans, this was about 10 years ago, were still using these, some kind of self-affirming, self-boosting statement during an average week. It's quite a common phenomenon. And they were given a pack of these. And they were asked to have a kind of a little selfie time every day, 20, 30 minutes, in which they meditated on these cards and were asked to focus positively on them and to appropriate what they said for themselves. And then the second group got the same cards, but they were asked to meditate on how this is true and how this is not true of me. So this is much more evaluative. It's a very different task, isn't it? So I'm special. Well, in what sense am I? I mean, can we all be special? What if everyone's special? No one's special. So what does special mean? You see, that's an interesting exercise. So you can meditate on how this is true and the third group was told do nothing at all. Just a form of control, another form of control. So then she followed them up at 3 and 6 months. Now, basically, when she did so, she found that these 2 groups didn't move much at all. But interestingly, in this group, those who at the beginning of the study had low self-worth, by the end of it, after rehearsing these statements and focusing positively on them, they felt worse about themselves. And she said, it's surprising how little experimentally robust evaluation there's been on this big popular movement of boosting ourselves up, she said. But these data, and they do fall in line with other data, suggest that they make people who already feel kind of okay about themselves feel a bit better. So if you're Donald Trump, you feel even better at the end of the 3 months. But people who feeling bad about, who have a negative, who's down on themselves, feel worse. They backfire, she said, for the people who seem to need them most. Why? It's just your own propaganda. It's just you. And there's the problem. If we're looking for what to base our sense of worth on, it's just me. And there's no evidence that it works. Indeed, the evidence is piling up that actually it drives us back to other people's approval. It so focuses us on ourselves, boosterism, thinking about ourselves. How much am I worth now? I've got to boost myself. I'm really important. I don't care about him. I'm going to stand a little taller. It so focuses on ourselves that it drives us in the end back seeking other people's approval. Or it reduces empathy because we're so preoccupied with ourselves that we haven't got time to think about other people. Some nice work showing how boosting yourself in this way reduces empathy, increases narcissism. So not only does it not work, but the evidence is coming in, fairly good evidence that it may even do harm. So if seeking other people's approval isn't reliable, and relying on our own doesn't do the trick. On what do we base our sense of worth? Well, I don't know whether any of you went to the Jordan Peterson and who was he debating out at the O2? Sam Harris. Did anybody go to that? You went, yeah? I didn't, but I did watch a bit of a clip, and the moderator there, he said, he accused Jordan Peterson of Jesus smuggling. And he says, what you do is you set up a problem, and then you smuggle in Jesus as the answer, you see. And some of you might think I'm about to do a bit of Jesus smuggling because I've set up a problem, and now I'm going to smuggle in Jesus. In fact, I'm not going to smuggle him. I'm just going to bring him right in. But what I speak at universities from time to time, and what I say there, though, is that this is a marketplace of ideas. This should be a place where you can really test your ideas and have robust conversation and debate. And ultimately, these questions of worth, of significance, that are so enmeshed with the bigger, deeper question of identity, who am I, these are not capable of being solved within a scientific method. That these are philosophical, these are big picture questions that all of us, I hope, at some point stand and we look up at the stars or at the sky and we look down at ourselves and we say, who am I? What am I for? What am I about? What am I worth? I'm just a bunch of atoms thrown into some sort of orbit briefly to fall back into the dust. And why am I telling myself I'm special then? What is this about? And so I don't want to even smuggle Jesus in, but I just want to take the opportunity to finish with by sharing what I think is a really important philosophy of life for me, and I know for many others who are Christians here, which is how our faith, those of us who are Christians, how it speaks into this area of worth. So I want to finish with that, if you'll just bear with me, okay? Because it's actually got quite a lot to say about this Christian faith. You see, Jesus of Nazareth, he loved to tell stories, really, really simple. He loved stories, and really simple ones, like this. He said this, and I'm reading from one of the Gospels. He said, supposing one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them, does he not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost sheep till he finds it? And you can see they're drawn in by this, so he doesn't not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost sheep until he finds it. And they all go, yeah, and then they think for a minute, and then they go, no, nobody would do that. That's crazy. Anybody around here will tell you, you don't leave a whole bunch of sheep in the wilderness. That's really funny that Jesus put that in the wilderness, you see. Who would leave 99 sheep to go and find one sheep in the wilderness? And Jesus carries on. And when he finds it, he says he joyfully puts it on his shoulders, goes home. And then he calls his friends and neighbors together. And he says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. Which one of you, wouldn't you all do that? And they're thinking, no. I don't think anyone here would do that. They'd be thinking, who's going to break the news to this numpty that he's lost the other 99? He left them in the wilderness. What? No shepherd does that. And then maybe the twinkle in Jesus' eye disappears and his tone changes. And he says, and I tell you, there's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner that repents than 99 who do not need to repent. And what's Jesus saying there? He's saying that God's love is reckless it's reckless to the point of risking everything for those who are lost. That's all he's saying. Don't overwork it. Don't overwork its simple story. It's set up to move the heart as well as the head. He's wanting his listeners to see that God's grace, it's the word, risks everything. Because he loves us. And I think there are two simple messages there. For us, for me, sharing my own faith. And it's this, like that lost sheep, we're, I think, more lost than we'll ever know. And like that sheep, we're more loved than we can ever imagine. And that is the basis for our self-worth in the Christian story. More lost than we'll ever know? You say, well, what does that mean? Well, in the Christian story, this is about that word sin. Sin is the crack that runs through everything about you and me. The crack runs right through. One Christian apologist defines sin as the human propensity to screw up. Except he didn't use the word screw up. But if we're really honest about ourselves, and this is a culture that says, be honest about it, be real, doesn't it? Okay, well, let's be real. And if I look inside myself for who I am as a human being, I see a crack that runs through everything. I see, after a long, honest look, I see a sickness in the soul. And it separates us from God, and it separates us from each other, and it leaves us feeling lost and orphaned and alone. So more lost than we ever knew, but more loved than we'd ever imagine. Because the shepherd in the Christian story comes after us. Jesus said, actually, I am the good shepherd in another time. He identifies himself with that story. He says, who lays down his life for the sheep, who puts himself into the place of the crack, the screwed upness of it, who draws it all into his own broken, cracked body on a cross, and somehow, in the mystery of that, deals with it and puts us right with God. And of course, that love that risks everything, that brings God to the earth to live as a man, to move among us, to tell stories like that, to go to the cross, to take the crackness of it all into his own broken body. That love, that grace is the word. Isn't a love that coerces us or overwhelms us. He won't bounce us into responding to it. It really is our choice. That's why Jesus says there's more rejoicing over one sinner that turns or repents than the 99 who think they don't need to. Because how we hear this really matters. But I just want to share that in the Christian story we are more loved than we'll ever know, and that changes everything. And finish with this. I want to ask you to do a thought experiment with me. The thought experiment is this. I want you to imagine that you have become a Christian, if you're not a Christian tonight, and thank you so much for coming. But just do this thought experiment. I know it's never going to happen. Never would happen. Not in a, just think what your friends would think, or it's never going to happen, okay? So, but just imagine, do the thought experiment that you actually opened your heart to this love. I know it's really hard to imagine, but just do it. And you faced up to the crack running through all that you are, and you found forgiveness, and you found a fresh start, and you found a love that's more than you ever knew. And keeping with the experiment, what would it look like, your sense of self-worth? Now, I want to suggest two things. First, you would go on a journey in which you'd begin to say no to the need to earn other people's approval. It's going to be a lifelong journey. Believe me, old habits die hard. It's a long, tough journey of saying no. But instead of relying on their approval, you'd go on a journey in which you learn to rely on God's approval, which is non-contingent, unearned, unwavering, unchanging. And no matter who you are and whatever you've done, no matter how deep and flawed those cracks have made you feel, it's the same love. It's always there. And that is what gives you that sense of worth and foundation to who you are. And God's love is actually grace. God's love, it's more about him than it is you. It's more about the kind of God that he is, that he loves you, than the kind of person that you are. It's not that he thinks you're especially lovable when he sees some of the cracks and stuff. It's just that he is love. His grace is love. And he's always for you. And that would be the foundation on which you base your life. And then that's the first thing that would happen to you if you became a Christian. But then second, you'd embark on this journey of being a Jesus follower. And over that time, you begin to look at your strengths and your achievements in a different way. It would take time, a lot of practice, but you begin to start looking at your strengths and achievements differently. You don't need them anymore to boost your ego. You begin to sense God's pleasure in what you do, and that would be enough. Let's say you score the impossible goal and they carry you out on your shoulders, on their shoulders. You got that bonus. You stun a concert audience with your cello concerto. You're phenomenal with kids. And a mum comes up to you afterwards, and you were looking after kids, whether it's a youth club or a church or whatever it is, and she just say, "You mean so much to my little girl. Thank you." And you've just got a gift with kids. You see, all of those things. And as a Christian, you'll take pleasure in those things because God will take pleasure in them. And yet when you leave the stadium or walk out of the stage door or leave the youth club and you've had that sense of approval and you step over a homeless person, you won't for 1 second be allowed to think that your cello performance or your goal or even your gifting and the way you are with kids makes you that much more important than that person. It means you're a great cello player, doesn't make you a more important person, because who you are as a person is grounded in, it's remade in who you are as a follower of Christ, a child of God. That's what. And so you see in the Christian story, your achievements, they're an expression of who you are, not the foundation of it. And that's the difference. And you look at maybe the person who's brought you here tonight, and you say, I don't know, he looks as driven and as anxious for approval as the next person. He knows. She knows that. And they're struggling with it because they know that isn't who they are now. This isn't them. This isn't where the real wine is found. This is the cheap stuff, looking other people's approval. And they're on a journey. And that is the Christian journey that I just want to say thanks so much for allowing me to share with you tonight. More lost than you ever knew. More loved than you will ever imagine.